Alright, so I want to finish talking about this sort of introduction to propositional or symbolic logic. It's a quick tour through this, but I just want to give you guys the basics for what we'll need to do the stuff in the inductive logic book. You know, he does use this. He uses some concepts from it. I think it is helpful. So just want to give you enough for this to make sense. There's a lot more you can do with symbolic logic, especially deductive symbolic logic, that we just don't have time for. So what I want to talk about is basically just translating and reading symbolic logic or propositional logic. So how do you translate a statement in symbolic or propositional logic? Well, the first thing you do is to figure out how many simple propositions there are in the sentence or statement, give each one a letter, and then you go through and figure out how they fit together. Like anything else we've done in this class, you just take it step by step. Break it into small bits, do it step by step. It gets a lot easier. The same thing that we've done, you know, in distilling arguments into numbered premises or in diagramming them is useful here. Break it into small chunks, take it step by step. Let me give you guys some examples of how this will work. So, I'll either take French or Spanish next semester. I might even take both, but I definitely won't take German. I think we've seen this sentence before, right? So we look at this and there's three propositions here, right? I will take French, I will take Spanish, I will take German, right? So we give each a letter. R, S, G, right? Well, now we think about this first part of the sentence. I'll either take French or Spanish. I might even take both. Well, pretty clearly we have this R or S. R, V, S, right? So we've got the first part of the sentence down. But I definitely won't take German. Well, I definitely won't take German, not G, right? Not the case, not true that I will take German. So we've got everything here except this last one, this but. Remember, we symbolize but usually the same way with the and, with this conjunction connective. So R or S in parentheses and not G. So another one, I will go on a diet, start lifting weights, or start running, but I won't do all three. So again, we look at the propositions. I will go on a diet, I will start lifting weights, I will start running. Those are the three propositions at work here. We give each a letter D, W, or R. Now we look at this first statement. I'll either go on a diet, start lifting weights, or start running. Well, you know, D or W or R, right? Now we've got the first part down. But I won't do all three. Well, what does that say? Well, I won't do all three means it's false that I will diet, start lifting weights, and run, right? So how would we symbolize that? Well, remember we've got this and here, so not D and W and R. So we've got the first two parts of the sentence in the form of symbols. Now all we need to do is get rid of this but. Well, we just add another and here, right? We also add, you know, some more parentheses to keep the statements apart, but now we've symbolized this more complex sentence. So one thing I'll say to you guys, and this is the reason we're going to practice this, is translating from English statements to formulas in symbolic logic can be pretty tricky. Again, this is one of those things in logic, there's a bit of art to it. Once you get things translated into these forms, they're just mathematical, right? They're very clearly true or false. A computer can decide, once these are in the form of symbolic logic, how they hang together, but you have to do the work of translating them. Computers can't do that. So why is it tricky? Well, look again, we spent a lot of time on this. But for one thing, where you put the parentheses matters. By changing where the parentheses are, you can change the meaning of the statement, right? So here's an example. Remember, everything inside the parentheses we treat as one letter, right? This first one, R or S inside parentheses and not G, doesn't mean the same thing as R and S and not G in parentheses, right? This is different because, we read the parentheses first and we treat it as one letter. Let me give you guys an example of how these two come apart. They are not logically equivalent because look at lines 1 and 3. On lines 1 and 3, R or S inside parentheses and not G is false, while the other one, R or S and not G, is true. Statements have different truth values. On some lines, they're not logically equivalent. They don't mean the same thing, right? Because you group these differently, you're going to get different things. Look, if we wanted to translate them back to English, the first one here means our first sentence. I'll take either French or Spanish next semester. I might even take both, but I definitely won't take German. Second one groups it differently. It says, I'll either take French or I'll take Spanish, but not German. Second sentence says, well, either I'll take French or I'll take Spanish, but not take German, right? Where these two differ, the second sentence allows for the possibility that you take German and French, right? Remember, we have this inclusive or case. In any case where you take French, this is going to be true even when the second part's false, even when you take German, right? Again, a little tricky, but hopefully that makes sense to y'all. One other thing that makes this tricky is you can only break sentences down into simple propositions. And you have to be careful that there actually are simple propositions, that you're not doing too much to break it up. I think you guys have already seen this with propositions, but you have to be careful with this because just because there's an and doesn't mean you can break it up into simple propositions and use conjunction. Let me give you guys an example. John got fired and then he got drunk and slashed his boss's tires. Yeah, right? Sad little story. You might be tempted to do this, right? John got fired, John got drunk, John slashed his boss's tires. F and D and S. Now we've symbolized our sentence. But remember, we've already seen you can move stuff around, right? A and B is the same for purposes of logic as B and A, right? So with that in mind, you could move around. You could put D and S first. Remember, we treat everything inside the parentheses as one thing, and F second. You could also keep F first and just move the D and S inside the parentheses, and that means the same thing, right? So F and D and S, for the purposes of logic, means the same as D and S and F, and S and F and D, and S and D and F. But think about the real world, what this sentence means. The order seems to matter, right? Is John got drunk and slashed his boss's tires and got fired the same as John got fired and then got drunk and slashed his boss's tires? No, right? The first sentence, seems like getting drunk and like vandalizing his boss's car is a reaction to getting fired. Second sentence says something completely different. The order it happened in is different. And it seems like, well, Maybe the reason he got fired was he got drunk and slashed his boss's tires, right? The order here matters in the sentence itself in a way that it can't matter when we put it in symbolic logic. So we have to treat this as one big proposition, right? You lose meaning, you change the meaning if you try to break it up into these three statements and symbolize it. Look, I'm not going to do a whole lot with this. Just keep in mind this is one of the ways that translation can be difficult. Despite the and here, this is really just one big proposition. Some of this, it might go back and help to look at the stuff on propositions in the Lavin book. One other thing to keep in mind is that what people literally say isn't necessarily the proposition they mean, right? This is why computers can't translate. They're very literal. We are not always literal in the way we speak, right? This happens with everything, but especially with not, right? Suppose I say, Dave is not an especially nice guy. You might want to symbolize this in this way. D equals Dave is an especially nice guy, not D. But not D means quite literally just that it's not the case that Dave is an especially nice guy. That's consistent. Well, he's a decent enough sort, but he's not especially nice, right? If I say Dave is not an especially nice guy, especially in some tones, I'm probably not just denying that he's really nice. I'm probably saying something else, right? If I'm like, you say, well, what do you think of Dave? And I'm like, well, he's not an especially nice guy. And you say, well, okay, well, he's not especially nice, but, is he kind of a jerk? That would be an odd question because I'm definitely implying that he's a jerk, even though literal whatever doesn't say that, right? So I probably mean to do more when I say, well, he's not an exceptionally nice guy. I probably mean to do more than just deny that he's a really nice person. I'm probably implying something a lot stronger. A better symbolization here probably wouldn't use the not at all. A better symbolization might be D equals David is a real, well, you can fill it in. So just keep this in mind. Again, it's the same stuff we've been doing a lot of times, figuring out, when we had to rewrite sentences to distill an argument, we had to figure out what the person meant, which is not always what they were saying. The same sort of skill comes in with symbolization, with translating. Same thing, same considerations. Translation involves interpretation in the same way that just putting an argument in numbered premise form or diagramming it involves interpretation. It's just unavoidable. Anyway, I know this is a really quick tour through and, might be confused on some points. Hopefully, if you've read the Weisberg book too, it'll make a bit of sense. And if you get the basic ideas here, we're really going to spend a lot of time in class practicing with this idea of logical equivalency, even more so practicing with translations. So as long as you have the basic idea, I think you're good. If it's a little murky, trust me, hopefully by the time we practice in class, we will clear that up.